Just checking, do you live here? We got a call. Suspicious person casing this property.
I do. 40 years now, officer.
You look more like someone who'd be trespassing than the homeowner.
Respectfully, officer. Just look at my mailbox. It says my name right there.
Lady, I don't care whose name is on the mailbox. You're a suspect, and suspects don't get to lecture me about anything.
Without warning, Keener forced Violet's hands behind her back and snapped the cuffs tight.
Officer, I'm saying this again. I'm not your suspect. I'm the homeowner.
Enough. You're being detained, and that's not up for debate.
Suddenly, a black sedan pulled up, and a man stepped out with quiet authority.
Take those cuffs off my mother.
The man stepping from the sedan wasn't just any man. He was the city's mayor, and Violet was his mother. The morning sun hit the roses just right when Violet Malcolm knelt down to trim them. 40 years she'd lived in this house. 40 years of these same roses, red and stubborn, growing right along the edge of her lawn. She didn't hear the patrol car until it stopped at her curb. A door slammed. Boots hit pavement. "Ma'am, step away from the house." Violet looked up. A young officer stood on her lawn, one hand resting on his belt. His name tag read Keener. She didn't move right away. She was 71 years old, kneeling in dirt she'd turned with her own hands for 4 decades. There was nothing to step away from. "Can I help you, officer?" "We got a call. Suspicious person casing this property." Keener's eyes moved over her. The gardening gloves, the shears, the old cardigan. "You live here?" "I do. 40 years now." She kept her voice calm, the way she used to talk to a classroom full of restless kids. "This is my house. My roses." Keener didn't blink. "You got ID on you?" "In my pocket. I'll just—" "Don't move." The words came out sharp, like a slap. Violet froze, one hand halfway to her cardigan pocket. Her heart started pounding, but she kept her face still. She'd learned a long time ago that fear only fed men like this. "I was just going to show you—" "I said don't move." He grabbed her wrist before she could finish the sentence. The shears fell out of her hand and landed in the grass. Violet gasped, more from shock than pain, as he twisted her arm behind her back. "Sir, this is my home. I live here. Get on the ground!" "Officer, please!" He didn't wait. He shoved her forward, hard, and the world tilted. Violet's knees hit the lawn first, then her chest, then her cheek pressed into the grass she had planted seeds in every spring since she was 31 years old. Keener's knee came down on her back, pinning her flat. "Stop resisting!" "I'm not resisting." Her voice cracked now, not from fear, but fury. "I have not moved an inch. Ma'am, if you don't stop fighting me, this is going to get a lot worse for you." Violet turned her head sideways in the grass, just enough to see her own front porch. Her mailbox stood a few feet away, her name painted on the side in careful white letters. Malcolm. She had painted that herself, 3 summers ago. Doors began opening up and down the street. A woman across the road stepped onto her porch, phone already raised. A man 2 houses down came jogging over, then stopped at the edge of his lawn, unsure if he should get closer. "Hey, she lives there! That's Miss Violet's house!" the woman shouted. Keener didn't even look up. "Ma'am, stay back. This doesn't concern you." More phones came out. More neighbors gathered at the edges of their yards, watching an old woman get pinned to her own lawn in broad daylight. Violet stayed still beneath his knee. She could feel the grass against her cheek, cool and damp from the morning dew. She could feel her heart slamming against her ribs. But somewhere underneath the fear, something colder and steadier took over. She had survived worse than this. She would survive this too. She just had to remember everything. The number on his badge, the number on his patrol car. The exact time if she could catch a glimpse of her kitchen clock through the front window. She would not scream. She would not cry. She would not give this man the satisfaction of watching her fall apart on her own front lawn. "You're going to regret this," she said quietly, almost to herself. Keener leaned down close to her ear. "Is that a threat, ma'am?" "No," Violet said. "It's a promise." He hauled her up by the arm, rougher than before, ignoring the wince that crossed her face. The neighbors kept filming. Somebody yelled for him to let her go. Keener ignored every voice around him and reached for the handcuffs hanging from his belt. Violet closed her eyes for just 1 second, steadying her breath. Then she opened them again, chin lifted, ready to face whatever came next. The cuffs bit into her wrists before she even felt them coming. Keener yanked her arms behind her back and clicked the metal shut, one wrist, then the other. He pulled the ratchet tight, tighter than it needed to be. Violet felt the metal dig into her skin. "That's too tight," she said. "You'll live. Officer, I'm asking you to loosen them." He didn't answer. He didn't even look at her. He grabbed her upper arm instead and turned her toward the cruiser, marching her across the very lawn she'd knelt in 10 minutes ago. The crowd on the sidewalk had grown. A dozen neighbors now, maybe more, phones raised high, capturing every second. "She's owned that house longer than you've been alive," a man shouted. "This is Miss Violet. She taught half this street's kids," a woman added. Keener barely turned his head. "This doesn't concern any of you. Step back. It concerns all of us when you're dragging an old woman across her own yard." Keener's jaw tightened, but he didn't stop walking. He radioed into his shoulder mic instead, voice flat and clipped. "Dispatch, be advised. Subject was uncooperative during initial contact. Transporting for further processing." Violet's mouth fell open. "Uncooperative? I didn't move. I told you exactly where my ID was. You can explain that at the station. I don't need to explain anything. This is my home." He tightened his grip on her arm, pulling her past the mailbox with her name painted on the side. Malcolm. Right there in white letters, plain as day. Close enough for him to read if he'd bothered to look. He didn't look. He kept walking, eyes fixed straight ahead, like the woman beside him was cargo instead of a person. They passed the rose bed she'd been trimming. The shears still lay in the grass where they'd fallen. Petals, red and soft, scattered near the fence. "Please," Violet said, her voice quieter now. "Just look at my mailbox. It says my name right there. Ma'am, I need you to stop talking. I built this garden with my own hands. Ma'am, I raised a family in that house." Keener stopped walking and turned to face her, close enough that she could smell his aftershave. "Lady, I don't care whose name is on a mailbox. Right now you're a suspect, and suspects don't get to lecture me about their gardens." Something in Violet went very still after that. Not defeated, just quiet, in the way a storm goes quiet right before it turns. She stopped arguing, stopped explaining. She looked past him instead, toward her front window, where the kitchen clock hung on the wall. 9:47. She repeated the number in her head, over and over, burning it into memory the way she used to make her students memorize their times tables. 9:47. 9:47. Then her eyes dropped to his chest. His badge caught the sunlight. She read the number twice, to be sure. Then she glanced at the cruiser parked at the curb, the unit number painted along the side panel. She memorized that too. Every detail, every number. She would not forget a single one. Keener pushed her forward again, toward the open rear door of the cruiser. "Watch your head." He didn't wait for her to duck on her own. He pressed his palm against the top of her skull and shoved her down into the seat, folding her into the back of the car like she was luggage instead of a woman who'd lived 71 years without ever once being handled like this. The door slammed shut beside her. Through the window, she could see the neighbors still standing there, phones lowering slowly now that the show seemed to be over. Some looked furious. Some looked heartbroken. One young mother stood frozen on her porch, hand pressed over her mouth. Violet sat straight in the back seat, wrists aching behind her, and stared out at her own front lawn. The roses, the mailbox, the shears still lying in the grass. She would remember every second of this, and somewhere, underneath the fear and the fury, a small, steady voice inside her whispered that this wasn't over. Not even close. The back seat of the cruiser smelled like old coffee and vinyl cleaner. Violet sat with her wrists still cuffed behind her, the metal pressing sharp lines into her skin. Through the plexiglass divider, she watched Keener pace outside on her own front walk, talking into his shoulder radio, glancing now and then at the small crowd still gathered near the sidewalk. Her house sat right there in front of her. The porch swing she'd hung 20 years ago, the kitchen window with its yellow curtains, the clock on the wall, just visible if she leaned forward and squinted. 9:52 now. She whispered it to herself, low enough that no one outside could hear through the glass. 9:52. She'd been sitting here 5 minutes already. Violet had spent 38 years teaching third grade. She knew how memory worked. She knew how to make something stick. Repetition. Rhythm. Say it enough times and it becomes part of you, like a song you can't shake. So she said it all again, quiet and steady, matching the numbers to a beat in her head. Badge number. Patrol car number. 9:52. The time she was placed in the car. She matched each one to a finger, pressing her thumb against each fingertip behind her back, the way she used to teach her students to count, without looking down at their hands. A second officer walked up and leaned against the cruiser near Keener. Violet caught pieces of their conversation through the cracked window. "She giving you trouble?" "Mouthy. Kept arguing the whole way over. Talking to herself now. Look at her." The second officer glanced through the window at Violet, who sat perfectly straight, lips moving slightly as she repeated her numbers one more time. "She okay in there?" "She's fine. Probably praying or something." Violet heard that last part clearly, and something hot flared behind her ribs. Praying. Like she was some fragile old woman falling apart in the back seat, muttering to God for comfort. She wasn't praying. She was building a case. There was a difference, and Keener didn't have the sense to know it. She lifted her chin and stared straight at him through the window, until he noticed. For a second, their eyes met. He looked away first. Good, she thought. Let him wonder what she's thinking. She went back to her numbers. Badge, car, time. She added new details now that her mind had steadied enough to notice them. The direction the cruiser was facing. The exact spot on her lawn where the shears still lay in the grass. The name of the second officer, stitched crooked on his uniform, half covered by his jacket collar so she only caught the first 4 letters. Every piece mattered. She didn't know yet how she'd use any of it. But 38 years in a classroom had taught her one more thing. You don't fight cruelty with panic. You fight it with proof. Outside, Keener straightened suddenly, adjusting his sleeves, his posture snapping tight like a soldier called to attention. Violet followed his gaze down the street. A row of black sedans, 4 of them, turned the corner onto Larkspur Court, moving slow and deliberate, flags fixed to the front bumpers snapping gently in the morning breeze. The neighbors on the sidewalk noticed, too. Phones that had started to lower came back up, angled now toward the approaching motorcade instead of the cruiser. Violet felt her pulse quicken, though she couldn't yet say why. She knew that motorcade. She'd know it anywhere, Keener took a step back from the cruiser, glancing between the approaching cars and the woman handcuffed in his back seat, his confidence flickering for the first time all morning. The lead car slowed to a stop directly behind the cruiser. Violet sat up straighter, ignoring the ache in her shoulders, ignoring the cuffs biting into her wrists. She watched the rear door of the lead sedan swing open. Whatever came next, she was ready. She had her numbers. She had her proof. And she had a feeling, deep in her chest, that Officer Keener was about to learn exactly whose lawn he'd dragged her across. The car door swung open before it even finished rolling to a stop. Ivan Bell stepped out in his suit, tie already loosened from a morning of meetings, moving fast across the grass before his security detail could catch up. He was the mayor of this city. But right now, none of that mattered. All he saw was the back seat of a patrol car and the shape of a woman sitting cuffed inside it. His mother. "Mom!" The word tore out of him, loud enough that every neighbor on the block turned to look. He crossed the lawn in seconds, shoes tearing through the grass Violet had trimmed just an hour before. Keener stiffened. "Sir, you can't." Ivan didn't even look at him. He yanked the cruiser door open and dropped to one knee beside it. "Mom, are you okay? Did he hurt you?" Violet's eyes filled, just for a second, before she blinked it back. "I'm okay, baby. I'm okay." "Who did this?" Ivan's voice cracked with something between fear and fury. He turned, finally, to face Keener. "Who put my mother in handcuffs?" Keener's face had gone pale. "Sir, I didn't realize—" "You didn't realize what? That she's a person? That this is her home? There was a call about a suspicious individual on the property, and when I—" "Suspicious individual?" Ivan stood up slowly, and even without raising his voice, something in his tone made Keener take a step back. "That is my mother. She raised me in that house right there. She's lived on this street longer than you've been alive." The neighbors pressed closer now, phones raised higher, capturing every word. Ivan reached into the cruiser, gently helping Violet turn so he could see the cuffs. "Take these off her, now." Keener hesitated, glancing toward his radio like it might save him. "I said now." Keener fumbled for his keys, hands shaking slightly as he reached in and unlocked the cuffs. The metal fell away from Violet's wrists, red marks already forming where the cuffs had dug into her skin. Ivan took her hands gently in his, checking the marks, his jaw tight with barely controlled rage. "She's bleeding," he said quietly, showing the officer the thin red lines circling her wrist. "Sir, I was following procedure." "Procedure." Ivan repeated the word like it tasted bad in his mouth. "What procedure puts a 71-year-old woman face down on her own lawn?" Violet stepped out of the car slowly, Ivan's arm supporting her. She stood tall despite the ache in her back, despite the grass stains on her cardigan. She would not let this man see her crumble. Not after everything. "What's your badge number?" Ivan demanded. Keener swallowed hard. "Sir, I don't think that's necessary." "I already have it," Violet said calmly, before Keener could finish. Ivan turned to her, surprised. "What?" "I memorized it the second he put me in that car. His badge number, his patrol unit. The time he cuffed me." She said it evenly, without a trace of panic, like she was reading off a grocery list. 947, if you're wondering. Keener's face went from pale to ashen. Ivan stared at his mother for a moment, something like awe breaking through his anger. "Say your badge number out loud," Ivan told Keener. "Right now. For everyone here." Keener hesitated, glancing at the dozen phones still recording. "Say it." Keener forced the numbers out through gritted teeth, his voice barely audible. "Louder," Ivan said. "So everyone hears it." He said it again, louder this time, humiliation burning red across his face. Violet watched him say it, feeling something settle inside her chest. Not peace, exactly. Not yet, but something close to it. Ivan wrapped his arm around her shoulders, guiding her carefully toward the porch steps, away from the cruiser, away from the man who'd put her there. "I've got you," he murmured. "I've got you, Mom." Violet allowed herself, just for a moment, to lean into him, to let her son hold her up the way she'd held him up 30 years ago, a scared little boy who'd lost everything and needed somewhere to land. Behind them, sirens wailed as another car pulled up fast, lights flashing against the row of houses. The sirens cut off, but the lights kept spinning red and blue across the front of the house as Chief Roland Vandorf stepped out of his car. He moved fast, smoothing the front of his uniform jacket as he crossed the lawn, his eyes already scanning the scene. The crowd, the phones, the mayor standing protectively beside an elderly woman on the porch steps. "Mr. Mayor." Vandorf stuck out his hand, all smiles, all calm. "I came the second I heard. I want you to know this department takes this extremely seriously." Ivan didn't take the offered hand. "Seriously? Your officer put my mother in handcuffs on her own lawn. And I understand your anger completely." Vandorf's voice stayed smooth, practiced, like he'd said these exact words 100 times before. "I promise you, we will conduct a full and fair review of the incident." Violet studied him from the porch steps. She'd spent 38 years reading children, learning to tell the difference between the ones who were truly sorry and the ones who just knew the right words to say. Vandorf knew all the right words. That was the problem. "A review," she repeated. "That's what you're calling this?" Vandorf turned to her, softening his expression into something meant to look sympathetic. "Ma'am, I am deeply sorry for what happened to you. You have my word. We will get to the bottom of this." "You already have the badge number," Violet said. "You already have his patrol unit. You already have a dozen witnesses standing right here with video. What exactly is there to get to the bottom of?" Vandorf's smile flickered, just slightly, before he caught himself. "These situations are always more complicated than they appear, ma'am. There's a process." Behind him, Violet watched an aide lean in close to Vandorf's ear, murmuring something low. Vandorf gave a small nod without turning his head, and the aide stepped away, already pulling out his phone. Violet didn't miss it. 38 years of watching kids pass notes under desks had taught her to notice things people thought were invisible. "What was that?" she asked. "Just department business, ma'am." "Nothing that concerns you." "Everything about this concerns me," Violet said. "I was the one on the ground." Ivan stepped closer to Vandorf, arms crossed. "I want that officer suspended. Today. Not after some review. Today." "Of course," Vandorf said smoothly. "He'll be placed on administrative duty while we investigate." "Administrative duty isn't a suspension. It's standard procedure, sir." Ivan's jaw tightened, but before he could push further, Vandorf extended a hand toward him again, this time landing on his shoulder in a gesture meant to look reassuring. "Mr. Mayor, I promise you, transparency is our top priority here. We want the same thing you want. Justice." Violet watched Vandorf's face as he said the word justice, watched how easily it slid off his tongue, like it cost him nothing. The crowd began thinning slowly, neighbors drifting back toward their houses now that the flashing lights and shouting had died down. A few lingered, still filming, still murmuring to each other about what they'd witnessed. Vandorf gave a final nod toward Ivan, then toward Violet, before turning back toward his car. "I'll be in touch personally, Mr. Mayor. You have my word." They watched him climb into his car and pull away, lights finally switching off as he turned the corner. Ivan exhaled hard, rubbing a hand down his face. "I don't trust him." "You shouldn't," Violet said quietly. She sat down slowly on the porch steps, her wrists still throbbing where the cuffs had bitten in. Ivan sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "They're going to write this their way," Violet said. "Keener's report, the official version. They'll have it filed and finished before anybody official even asks a single question. That's how this works, baby." "I've seen it before." Ivan looked at her, something hardening behind his eyes. "Then we don't let them." Violet turned to him, and for the first time since the cuffs had come off, something like a plan began forming behind her calm expression. "No," she said. "We don't." Ivan pulled out his phone, already scrolling to a contact. "I'm calling Danica Owen." "Right now." Violet nodded slowly, watching the empty street where Vandorf's car had disappeared, already certain the fight had only just begun. 2 days passed before Danica Owen knocked on Violet's front door. Violet answered it herself, moving a little slower than usual, her wrists still faintly bruised where the cuffs had cut in. Ivan was already in the kitchen, 2 mugs of untouched coffee sitting cold on the table in front of him. "Danica." Violet stepped aside to let her in. "Thank you for coming." "Wouldn't be anywhere else." Danica set her bag down on the table and pulled out a folder thick with papers. She was sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who noticed everything and forgot nothing, which was exactly why Ivan had called her the moment the cruiser pulled away 2 days ago. "So, where do things stand?" Ivan asked, pushing his coffee aside. Danica flipped open the folder. "Keener's been placed on desk duty. That's confirmed." "Desk duty," Violet repeated flatly. "Not suspended." "Not yet, but it's something." Violet sat down across from her, folding her hands on the table. "Chief Vandorf stood on my lawn and promised transparency. 2 days later, and the man who tackled me is sitting at a desk collecting a paycheck like nothing happened." "I know," Danica said. "I'm working on it." Ivan's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, frowning, then picked it up to read the alert scrolling across the screen. His face changed instantly. "What?" Violet asked. Ivan didn't answer right away. He kept reading, his jaw tightening with every line. "Ivan!" He turned the phone around so she could see it herself. A news alert, bold red letters across the top. "DA files charges against woman in viral arrest video. Resisting arrest, assault on officer." Violet stared at the words for a long moment, waiting for them to make sense. They didn't. "That's not possible," she said quietly. Danica grabbed the phone, scanning the article herself, her expression darkening with every second. "This is built on Keener's body cam. There's a clip attached here." She tapped the link. A short video played, 10 seconds, maybe less, showing Violet's arm jerking as Keener grabbed her wrist. Out of context, it almost looked like she'd pulled away from him. It almost looked like resistance. "That's not what happened," Violet said, her voice rising now. "He grabbed me. I was reaching for my ID, and he grabbed my wrist before I could even move." "I know," Danica said. "But this clip doesn't show that. It starts right as your arm pulls back. Somebody edited this on purpose." Ivan stood up so fast, his chair scraped hard against the floor. "This is retaliation. Vandorf promised us a review, and instead, his department hands the DA a doctored clip to charge my mother with assault? I believe that's exactly what happened," Danica said grimly. Violet sat very still, staring down at her own hands folded on the table, the same hands that had trimmed roses 2 mornings ago, the same hands that had been cuffed behind her back for reaching toward her own pocket. Now they wanted to call her a criminal for it. "They're punishing me," she said slowly, "for surviving what he did to me." "That's exactly what this is," Danica said. "And it tells me something important. It tells me they're scared. You embarrassed them in front of the entire city, Violet. This is them trying to take the narrative back." Ivan paced the length of the kitchen, hands pressed against the back of his neck. "So what do we do?" Danica closed the folder and looked at both of them, steady and certain. "We fight it properly. I'm filing a subpoena today for the complete body cam footage, start to finish, no editing, no cuts. If that clip is doctored, the full footage will prove it. Violet looked up at her. And if they refuse? Then we make them, Danica said simply. This isn't over, not even close. They think they can bury the truth under paperwork before anybody looks too closely. We're going to make sure everybody looks. Violet nodded slowly, feeling something steady itself in her chest, the same cold resolve she'd carried in the back of that cruiser 2 days ago. Then let's get started, she said. Danica gathered her folder and stood, already reaching for her phone to begin drafting the subpoena. I'll be in touch the moment I have that footage. She left the way she'd come, quick and certain, leaving Violet and Ivan alone in the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee gone cold, and a fight that had only just begun to show its true size. A week passed before Danica Owen came back, and this time she brought more than a folder. She walked into Violet's kitchen carrying a cardboard box, setting it down on the table with a heavy thud. Violet eyed it warily as Danica pulled off the lid, revealing stacks of paper inside. Deeds, sale records, county filings. "What's all this?" Violet asked. "Property records," Danica said. "For the whole street." Ivan leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You said you had something on the subpoena." "I do. The DA's office is stalling on releasing the full body cam footage, which tells me it probably proves exactly what we think it proves." Danica pulled a chair out and sat down, spreading a handful of papers across the table. "But while I was digging through public filings trying to build your case, Violet, I noticed something else, something bigger." Violet pulled the papers closer, scanning the names typed across the top of each deed. Her stomach tightened as she recognized them, one after another. "That's Mr. Dorothy's old place," she said, pointing to one. "And that's the Hendricks house, 2 doors down. And this one." Her finger stopped on a 3rd page, and her breath caught. "This was Regina Coleman's house. She lived on this street 43 years, same as me." "All 3 of them sold within the last year," Danica said. "All 3 sold for well below market value." "Regina didn't want to sell," Violet said slowly, memory surfacing. "I remember her telling me she felt harassed. Officers kept stopping by, asking questions, saying neighbors complained about noise, about her yard, about nothing at all. She got so tired of it. She just wanted peace." "Same story with Mr. Dorothy," Danica said, tapping the 2nd file. "Filed a complaint against a patrol officer for repeated stops on his property. Complaint went nowhere. 2 months later, he sold his house and moved to his daughter's place upstate." Yvonne stepped closer to the table now, reading over Violet's shoulder. "Who was the officer?" Danica turned the page around so he could see the incident report attached beneath the deed. Keener's name sat right there in black ink. Violet felt something cold settle low in her stomach. "It's the same man. Same officer, same pattern, same result," Danica confirmed. "Elderly black homeowners on this exact block, harassed until they gave up and sold. Keener's name shows up on incident reports for all 3 properties before each sale." "This isn't a bad cop having a bad day," Ivan said quietly. "This is systematic." "I think so too," Danica said, "but I don't have the full picture yet. I need to find out who's buying these houses. Somebody's benefiting from all this. And I doubt it's Keener himself. Officers don't harass old women out of their homes for fun. Somebody's paying for this, one way or another." Violet sat back slowly in her chair, staring at the papers scattered across her kitchen table. 3 names, 3 neighbors. 3 lives quietly dismantled one harassment complaint at a time, until giving up their homes felt easier than fighting. "They almost got me too," she said softly. Ivan looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if you hadn't pulled up when you did, I don't know how this would have gone. maybe I'd have been another name in that box. Another old woman who got tired of being stopped, tired of being watched, and just gave up her house to make it stop. The kitchen went quiet for a moment. Outside, a lawnmower buzzed somewhere down the street, ordinary and distant. Danica began gathering the papers back into the box, her expression set with new determination. I need time to trace where these sales are going. Property records will show a buyer, but buyers can hide behind companies. I need to find out who's really behind this. How long will that take? Ivan asked. Days, maybe longer. These things get buried on purpose. Danica closed the box and stood. But I promise you both, I'm not stopping until I find out who's pulling the strings. Violet walked her to the door, gripping the frame for support, as old grief and new anger settled together in her chest. Regina Coleman, Mr. Dorothy. Names she'd known for decades, now reduced to case files in a cardboard box. Find them, Violet said quietly. Whoever's behind this, find them. Danica nodded once, serious. I will. She left with the box tucked under her arm, and Violet stood on her porch a long while after the car pulled away, staring at the empty houses down the street where old friends used to live. The following week, Violet stood at her front window and watched the news play out on two different screens at once. One in her living room, one on her phone, both showing the same city from two very different angles. Outside City Hall, a crowd had gathered. Hundreds of people, maybe more, holding signs with her name painted across them. Violet Malcolm deserves justice. Not one more stolen home. Ivan stood at a podium in front of them, sleeves rolled up, voice carrying clear and steady over the noise of the crowd. My mother taught in this city for 38 years, Ivan said, his voice rising over the applause. She raised generations of children who now run businesses in this town, who now teach in our schools, who now serve on our police force. And 2 weeks ago, she was thrown to the ground on her own front lawn for the crime of gardening while black. The crowd roared. Violet pressed a hand to her chest, watching her son stand there, refusing to back down despite everything stacking against him. I will not stay silent while this happens to my mother, or to any mother in this city, Ivan continued. I stand with Violet Malcolm. I will not stop until justice is served. Violet's phone buzzed in her hand, another headline sliding across the screen, and her stomach dropped the moment she read it. Commissioner Whitlock accuses mayor of cronyism, announces ethics inquiry. She clicked the link, watching a second video load. Commissioner Faye Whitlock standing at her own podium, sharp-suited, composed, addressing a smaller but equally attentive crowd of reporters. Mayor Bell's conduct at the scene raises serious concerns, Whitlock said smoothly. An elected official inserting himself into an active police matter, demanding an officer's personal information on camera, is not leadership. It's obstruction. It's favoritism. This office will be launching a formal ethics inquiry into whether Mayor Bell abused his position for personal reasons. Violet's grip tightened around her phone. Personal reasons, she repeated aloud, disgusted. He was defending his mother. The reporter's voice continued, laying out the announcement in careful, measured tones, framing Ivan's rescue of his own mother as some kind of scandal. Violet watched Whitlock's face throughout the clip, composed and confident, not a flicker of doubt anywhere behind her eyes. She switched back to the first video, watching Ivan continue his speech, unaware yet of what Whitlock had just launched against him. The crowd behind him cheered every word, signs waving, voices rising in support. Two battles now, playing out on two separate screens, both circling the same lawn where this had all started. That evening, Ivan called, his voice tired in a way Violet rarely heard from him. You saw it, he said. It wasn't a question. I saw it, Violet confirmed, sitting down slowly in her armchair, phone pressed to her ear. "Whitlock's coming after you now. She's trying to make this about me instead of what happened to you. Trying to turn the story into cronyism and corruption instead of a woman getting thrown on her lawn. I know, baby. They're threatening an impeachment inquiry, Mom. Over helping you." Violet closed her eyes, feeling the weight of it settle over her. She'd spent decades protecting Ivan, first as a scared little boy who'd lost his mother far too young, then as a young man finding his footing. And now, somehow, her fight was becoming his burden all over again. "You shouldn't have to pay for what happened to me," she said quietly. "Don't." Ivan's voice hardened. "Don't you dare say that. I'm not backing down, not for Whitlock, not for anybody. You didn't deserve what happened to you, and I'm not going to let them punish me for standing up for my own mother." Violet pressed her lips together, pride and worry tangling together in her chest. "I know you won't back down. That's what scares me." "I'll be fine, Mom." "You don't know that." "Neither do you," Ivan said, softer now. "But we didn't back down before, and we're not starting now." Violet sat in the quiet of her living room long after the call ended, staring at the two headlines still glowing on her phone screen. One calling for justice, one calling for her son's downfall. Both born from the same 10 seconds on her front lawn. Whatever came next, she understood now that this fight had grown bigger than her house, bigger than her arrest. It had become a fight for her son, too. Danica Owen showed up 3 days later without knocking first, letting herself in through the side door the way she'd started doing over the past few weeks. Violet looked up from the kitchen table, where she'd been sorting through mail, and knew immediately from Danica's face that she'd found something. "Sit down," Danica said, already pulling papers from her bag. "You need to see this." Ivan, who'd stopped by for their usual check-in, pulled out a chair across from Violet, as Danica spread a fresh set of documents across the table, this time filled with corporate filings instead of property deeds. "I traced the buyer," Danica said. "Every single house Keener harassed his way into emptying, Regina Coleman's place, Mr. Dorothy's place, the Hendricks house, all 3 were purchased by the same company. Larkspur Holdings, LLC. "Larkspur," Violet repeated. "Same as the street." "That's not a coincidence," Danica said. "This company was formed specifically to buy up corner lots on this block. I checked the filings. They've acquired every corner property on Larkspur Court, except one." She didn't need to say which one out loud. Violet felt it settle over her anyway, heavy and certain. "Mine?" Violet said quietly. "Yours," Danica confirmed. "You're the last piece they need. Whoever's behind Larkspur Holdings has been trying to acquire this entire block for redevelopment, and every single sale before yours came after months of police harassment aimed at making the owner desperate enough to sell cheap and sell fast." Ivan leaned forward, jaw tight. So Keener wasn't just some cop with a grudge. He was doing a job. "That's exactly what it looks like," Danica said. "A coordinated pressure campaign. Stop after stop, complaint after complaint, until people gave up and sold, rather than keep dealing with it. And it worked 3 times over, before it ever got to you." Violet stared down at the papers, at the tidy corporate names stamped across each filing, feeling something twist inside her chest. Regina Coleman hadn't left because she wanted a quieter life somewhere else. Mr. Dorothy hadn't moved upstate because he missed his daughter more than his home of 30 years. They'd been pushed. Both of them. Worn down on purpose until leaving felt like the only way to breathe again. "Why my corner?" Violet asked. "Why does it matter so much?" "Corner lots have more frontage," Danica explained. "For whatever they're planning to build, they need the full block, and your house sits right in the middle of the last piece they haven't secured. Without your lot, their whole redevelopment plan doesn't work the way they want it to." "So I'm the last domino," Violet said slowly. You're the reason this all started, Danica said. That call about a suspicious person on your lawn wasn't random. I think it was the opening move in the exact same playbook Keener used on your neighbors. Ivan rubbed a hand across his jaw, thinking. Who's actually behind Larkspur Holdings? Who owns it? That's the part I'm still working on, Danica admitted. Shell companies bury ownership behind layers of paperwork on purpose. I've got a partial filing showing a registered agent, but the real owners aren't listed anywhere public yet. I need more time to peel back the layers. Violet sat back in her chair, staring at the papers without really seeing them anymore. Her mind instead on Regina Coleman's porch, on the two of them sitting out there some evenings sharing sweet tea and complaints about the neighborhood kids cutting through their yards. Regina was gone now, moved 3 states away to live near a daughter who barely had room for her. All because somebody wanted her corner lot badly enough to make her life miserable until she gave in. They picked the wrong house this time, Violet said quietly. Danica looked up at her. What do you mean? Regina didn't have anybody standing beside her when they came after her house. Mr. Dorothy didn't either. Violet's eyes hardened, something steady and unshakable settling behind them. I have a lawyer digging through their paperwork, and a son who happens to run this city. Whoever's behind that company picked the wrong corner to want so badly. Ivan reached across the table, squeezing his mother's hand gently. We're going to find out who they are, Mom. I promise you that. Danica began gathering the papers back into her bag, her expression set with fresh determination. Give me time. I'm close. Whoever's hiding behind that shell company made one mistake somewhere in this paperwork, and I intend to find it. She left the way she always did, quick and purposeful, and Violet stood at her kitchen window long after the car pulled away, staring out at the empty houses down the block where old friends used to live, feeling more certain than ever that her lawn had never been the real target. It had always been the whole street. The deposition room was cold and plain, just a long table, a court reporter in the corner, and a row of chairs facing each other like 2 sides of a boxing ring. Violet sat beside Danica, hands folded on the table in front of her, back straight, despite the ache that still crept into her shoulders some mornings. Across from her, Officer David Keener sat beside a city attorney, his uniform replaced by an ill-fitting suit that made him look smaller than she remembered. This was the first time she'd seen his face since the lawn. Let's begin, the city attorney said, nodding toward the court reporter. Danica leaned forward, sliding a printed page across the table toward Keener. Officer Keener, according to your official incident report, you initiated contact with Mrs. Malcolm at 9:41 a.m. Is that correct? Keener glanced at the paper, then at his attorney, before answering. That sounds right, yes. And you state here that she was, quote, uncooperative and combative from the moment of contact, correct? Yes, Danica turned to Violet. Mrs. Malcolm, can you tell us what time you were placed in the patrol car? Violet didn't hesitate. 9:47. Keener blinked. And how do you know that so precisely? Danica asked. Because I could see my kitchen clock through the front window while I sat cuffed in the back seat, Violet said calmly. I read it several times to make sure. 9:47 exactly. Danica slid another paper across the table, this one showing dispatch records. Officer, the department's own dispatch log shows your call for backup went out at 9:44 a.m., 3 minutes after you say Mrs. Malcolm was already, in your words, resisting arrest. That's a 3-minute gap between when you claim the struggle began and when you actually radioed for help. Can you explain that? Keener's face flushed. I don't recall the exact sequence of... You wrote the report, Danica said. You didn't recall the sequence when you wrote it either? I was focused on securing the scene, not watching a clock. But Mrs. Malcolm was, Danica said, And her account lines up exactly with the dispatch log. Yours doesn't. Keener's attorney leaned in to whisper something, but Keener waved him off, jaw tight. "What's your badge number, officer?" Danica asked next. Keener recited it, clipped and quiet. "And Mrs. Malcolm, do you recognize that number?" "Yes," Violet said. "I memorized it the moment he cuffed me, along with his patrol unit number, along with the time." She looked directly at Keener as she said it, watching something flicker behind his eyes. Not quite fear. Something closer to disbelief that a woman he'd dismissed so easily had remembered him with such precision. The deposition dragged on for another hour, question after question, chipping away at inconsistencies buried inside Keener's own paperwork. By the end, his composure had cracked in several places, his answers growing shorter, his eyes flicking more often toward his attorney for rescue that never quite came. 2 days later, the district attorney's office quietly downgraded one of the charges against Violet, citing insufficient evidence to support the assault claim. It wasn't everything, but it was something, and Violet allowed herself a small, private moment of satisfaction reading the notice at her kitchen table. That same week, Danica called with news that mattered even more. "I found it," she said, breathless, the moment Violet picked up the phone. "Found what? Who's really behind Larkspur Holdings?" Danica's voice shook slightly, not from fear but from the weight of what she'd uncovered. "The registered agent led me to a secondary filing, buried under an amendment nobody thought to check twice. One of the listed principals is a man named Marcus Renfrost." "I don't know that name," Violet said. "You wouldn't. He's not the important part. He's married to Commissioner Whitlock's sister." Violet sat down slowly at her kitchen table, gripping the phone tighter. "Faye Whitlock. Whitlock has an undisclosed financial stake in Larkspur Holdings," Danica said. "She's not just protecting Keener's job to shield the department from embarrassment. She's protecting her own investment. Your corner lot is worth real money to her, Violet. This whole thing, the harassment campaign, the charges against you, even the ethics inquiry against Ivan, it all traces back to her." Violet closed her eyes, feeling pieces settle into place that had been scattered for weeks. Keener wasn't the architect of any of this. He was a tool. A blunt, cruel tool, but a tool all the same, wielded by someone with far more power and far more to lose. "Call Ivan," Violet said quietly. "Tell him everything. Right now." "I'm calling him the second we hang up," Danica said. "This changes everything about who we're really fighting." Violet set the phone down slowly after the call ended, staring out her kitchen window toward the street where it had all begun, understanding now that the woman behind the curtain had been circling her lawn from the very start. The courtroom was packed the day Danica finally forced the district attorney to review Keener's complete body cam footage. Violet sat beside her lawyer, hands folded in her lap, watching the screen mounted at the front of the room. The footage began before the edited clip ever started, several full minutes earlier, showing Violet kneeling calmly in her garden, showing Keener's cruiser pulling up, showing her explaining clearly and quietly that she lived there, that her ID was in her pocket. Then it showed him grabbing her wrist before she'd moved an inch. The room went dead silent as the footage played out in full, minute by minute, exactly the way Violet remembered it. No struggle, no resistance, just an old woman reaching slowly toward her own pocket, and an officer who'd already decided who she was before she ever opened her mouth. The district attorney sat through the entire tape without speaking, and when it ended, she looked visibly shaken. By that afternoon, every charge against Violet had been dropped. Outside the courthouse, the crowd that had gathered erupted into cheers the moment the news broke. Ivan stood beside his mother on the steps, arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling for the first time in weeks. Keener, meanwhile, was suspended without pay. The department finally forced to act under the weight of undeniable video evidence. That night, Violet sat on her porch with a cup of tea, watching neighbors wave from their yards, feeling something loosen in her chest that had been clenched tight since the morning her roses got interrupted. It felt, for a few hours, like it was finally over. It wasn't. 3 days later, Danica called, her voice tight and urgent. "Turn on the news!" Violet clicked the television on just in time to catch the headline, scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Officer Keener reinstated with back pay, commended for restraint under provocation. Violet stared at the screen, certain she'd misread it. She hadn't. "How?" she asked into the phone, her voice barely above a whisper. "Internal Review Board," Danica said grimly. "Whitlock controls it." She had them quietly reverse the suspension, spin the whole thing as restraint instead of assault. "He's back on payroll as of this morning. Full commendation attached." Violet's hand trembled slightly around the phone. "After everything. After the footage. After all of it. There's more," Danica said, and something in her tone made Violet's stomach drop even further. "Check your mail today." Violet walked to her front door on unsteady legs and pulled a thick envelope from her mailbox, the same mailbox with her name painted carefully in white letters. She tore it open right there on the porch. A code violation notice. Overgrown vegetation. Improper fencing. Structural concerns requiring immediate inspection. Fines totaling several $1,000s, with a deadline for compliance or forced sale proceedings would begin. "This is fake," Violet said, her voice shaking now, not from fear but fury. "My yard is immaculate. I trim those roses every single week." "I know," Danica said. "It's manufactured. Same playbook they used on Regina Coleman, on Mr. Dorothy. They're coming after your house directly now." Violet sank onto her porch steps, envelope still clutched in her hand, staring out at the same lawn where all of this had begun. Her phone buzzed again. Ivan this time, his voice tight with barely controlled anger the moment she answered. "Mom, I need to tell you something." "I already know about Keener," she said, "and the code violation." "There's more," Ivan said. "Whitlock's ethics inquiry escalated today. The city council is calling for an emergency vote. They want me to resign, Mom, or they're moving forward with impeachment proceedings." Violet closed her eyes, feeling the full weight of it land at once. Keener reinstated, her home threatened, her son's career hanging by a thread, all because he'd knelt down on this same lawn weeks ago and called her Mom in front of the entire city. "They're trying to take everything at once," she said quietly. "My house, your job, all of it, in a single week." "I'm not resigning," Ivan said, steel returning to his voice. "I don't care what they threaten." Violet looked down at the code violation notice crumpled in her fist, then out at her roses, still blooming despite everything trying to uproot them. "Then we don't let them win," she said. "Not now. Not after everything." "I'm calling an emergency council session," Ivan said, "before any resignation vote can happen. I want everything Danica's found laid out in front of the entire council, on the record where they can't bury it again." Violet nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see her. "Then let's finish this." The next morning, Violet arrived at City Hall before the sun had fully cleared the buildings downtown, Ivan's office already buzzing with quiet, focused urgency. Danica stood at a long table pushed against the far wall, papers organized into careful stacks, color-coded folders lined up like soldiers ready for battle. "We have 6 hours before the council convenes," Danica said, not looking up as Violet and Ivan walked in. "I need both of you to help me make sure this is airtight." Violet sat down at the table, still gripping the crumpled code violation notice she'd carried with her since yesterday. "Where do we start?" "From the beginning?" Danica said, sliding the first folder toward her. Everything, laid out in order, so the council can't claim confusion or missing context. She opened the folder to reveal a printed still frame from the body cam footage. Violet kneeling calmly in her garden, Keener's cruiser just arriving. This is the full, unedited footage. Already public record now, already proven in court. This establishes the initial incident beyond dispute. Yvonne leaned over the table, arms crossed. And the pattern? Danica pulled the second folder forward, thick with property deeds and incident reports. Regina Coleman, Mr. Dorothy, the Hendricks family. 3 homes, 3 harassment campaigns, all traced back to Keener, all ending in rushed, underpriced sales. I've cross-referenced every incident report with the sale dates. The timeline doesn't lie. Violet studied the papers, feeling the same ache return that she'd carried since first seeing her old neighbors' names typed across those deeds. And Larkspur Holdings? Danica opened the third folder, tapping a page near the top. Registered agent traces to Marcus Renfrost. Renfrost is married to Faye Whitlock's sister. I found a secondary filing, an amendment nobody thought to double-check, listing Whitlock herself as a minority stakeholder in the company. She never disclosed it publicly, and as a sitting commissioner, she was legally required to. That's the piece that connects everything, Ivan said slowly. Keener wasn't just a bad cop. He was working the same street Whitlock had a financial stake in. Exactly, Danica said. And this, she pulled out the final folder, sliding it toward Violet directly, is the code violation notice issued against your house. Violet looked down at the papers inside. Danica had already annotated them, red circles marking inconsistencies throughout. This was filed the same week Whitlock's ethics inquiry against Ivan escalated, Danica explained. Same week Keener got reinstated. I pulled the inspection records. No inspector ever set foot on your property. The violations listed don't match anything visible in photos taken of your yard just days earlier. This notice was manufactured, timed deliberately to pressure you the moment public attention started shifting elsewhere. Violet set the papers down carefully, feeling something settle hard and cold in her chest. They tried to take my house the same week they tried to take my son's job. Because it's the same fight, Danica said. It's always been the same fight. Your lawn was never separate from Ivan's office. It's all one scheme. And today, we prove it in front of the entire council. All at once. Yvonne paced slowly along the length of the table, reviewing each folder as Danica laid it out. We can't leave anything out. If we hold anything back, they'll claim we're hiding something too. Agreed, Danica said. Full footage, full property pattern, full ownership trail, full timeline on the code violation. Everything presented together, so there's no room left for them to spin it. Violet reached for the folder containing Regina Coleman's old deed, running her thumb gently across the printed name. I want to speak, she said quietly. Not just Danica. Not just Ivan. Me too. Ivan stopped pacing. Mom, you don't have to. I know I don't have to, Violet said, steady and certain. I want to. They put their hands on me on my own lawn. They tried to make me sound like a criminal in the paperwork afterward. I want to stand in that room and tell them exactly what happened. In my own words. So nobody in that council can pretend this was ever abstract. Ivan looked at her for a long moment, something like pride breaking through the exhaustion on his face. All right, he said. Then you speak. Danica began organizing the folders into a single leather case, snapping it shut with quiet finality. The session starts at 2 o'clock. I want us walking in there together, united, with nothing held back. Violet rose from her chair slowly, feeling the ache still lingering in her shoulders, feeling the weight of everything gathered on that table pressing steady and certain against her resolve. "Then let's go," she said. "Let's finish what they started on my lawn." The council chamber was packed by 2 o'clock, every seat filled, reporters lining the back wall with cameras already rolling. Violet sat in the front row beside Ivan and Danica, the leather case resting on Danica's lap like a loaded weapon waiting to be fired. Commissioner Faye Whitlock sat near the front of the chamber, composed as ever, a folder of her own spread across her table like she'd already won. Ivan opened the session himself, standing at the podium with a steadiness that surprised even Violet. "Before this council votes on anything regarding my conduct, I'm asking for the floor to be given to my legal counsel, Danica Owen, to present evidence directly relevant to these proceedings." The council chairman nodded reluctantly. "You have 20 minutes." Danica rose and walked to the podium, opening the case with practiced calm. "Members of the council, what I'm about to show you isn't about cronyism. It's about a coordinated scheme to force elderly black homeowners off Larkspur Court, using police harassment as a weapon." She played the full body cam footage first, the chamber falling silent as Violet's calm voice filled the room, explaining clearly that she lived there, that her ID was in her pocket, moments before Keener grabbed her wrist. "This incident wasn't isolated," Danica continued, pulling up the second set of documents. 3 homes on this same block were sold under nearly identical circumstances over the past year, each following months of harassment from the same officer. She laid out the pattern methodically. Regina Coleman, Mr. Dorothy, the Hendricks family. Each incident report, each rushed sale, each connection back to Larkspur Holdings, LLC. "And who benefits from these sales?" Danica asked, turning to the final folder. "Larkspur Holdings traces back to Marcus Renfrost, who is married to Commissioner Whitlock's sister. Filing records show Commissioner Whitlock herself holds an undisclosed financial stake in this company, a stake she was legally required to report, and never did." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Whitlock's composed expression cracked for the first time, her jaw tightening. "This is absurd," Whitlock interrupted, rising from her seat. "Unsubstantiated speculation dressed up as—" "I have the notarized filings right here," Danica said calmly, holding up the documents for the room to see. "Along with the code violation notice issued against Mrs. Malcolm's property last week, timed precisely with the escalation of this ethics inquiry against Mayor Bell. No inspector ever visited her home. The violations listed don't match any photo taken of her property in the past month. You're twisting a routine inspection into some kind of conspiracy," Whitlock snapped, but her voice had lost its earlier smoothness. Danica turned toward the council instead of answering her directly. "I'd ask this council to compare the timeline for themselves. Officer Keener harasses Mrs. Malcolm. The mayor intervenes publicly. Commissioner Whitlock launches an ethics inquiry against him within days. Keener gets quietly reinstated the same week Mrs. Malcolm receives a fraudulent code violation threatening her home. Every piece of this points toward the same beneficiary." The chairman looked toward Whitlock, his expression hardening. "Commissioner, can you confirm or deny a financial stake in Larkspur Holdings, LLC?" Whitlock hesitated, just a fraction of a second too long. "I would need to review my own filings before—" "You knew," Violet said, rising from her seat before she'd fully decided to speak. The chamber turned toward her, silent and waiting. "You knew exactly what was happening on that street. You knew what happened to Regina Coleman, to Mr. Dorothy. You let it happen because you had money riding on my neighbors giving up their homes." "Ma'am, you're out of order," the chairman said gently, though he made no move to stop her. "I was face down on my own lawn," Violet continued, voice steady despite the tremor building beneath it. "Cuffed in front of my neighbors because a company you have a stake in wanted my corner lot badly enough to send an officer to harass me off it." I want this council to understand that this was never about one bad arrest. This was a plan, and I almost became the fourth name on that list. Silence blanketed the chamber. Whitlock sat frozen at her table, the folder in front of her suddenly meaningless against the weight of everything laid bare in the room. The chairman cleared his throat, glancing between Whitlock and the stack of evidence still displayed on the screen behind Danica. This council will take a brief recess to review these materials before proceeding further. As the gavel struck, Violet caught sight of Chief Roland Vandorf near the back of the chamber, already rising quietly from his seat, edging toward the exit before anyone thought to turn their attention his way. Chief Roland Vandorf made it halfway to the chamber doors before council security stepped into his path, blocking the exit with quiet authority. Chief Vandorf, the council has requested you remain for questioning. Vandorf froze, glancing back over his shoulder toward the front of the room, where the chairman had returned from recess with a face carved from stone. The murmur that had filled the chamber during the break died down instantly as everyone turned to watch. "Take your seat, Chief," the chairman said. "This concerns you as well." Vandorf walked back slowly, the confident stride from weeks ago on Violet's lawn nowhere to be found now. He lowered himself into his chair beside Whitlock, who sat rigid, staring straight ahead, her earlier composure completely gone. The chairman addressed the chamber. "This council has reviewed the evidence presented by counsel. We find the pattern documented here deeply troubling, and we will not allow it to continue unanswered." He turned first to Whitlock. "Commissioner Whitlock, given the undisclosed financial interest in Larkspur Holdings LLC, and the clear conflict this creates regarding your oversight of both the police department and this ethics inquiry, this council requests your immediate resignation." Whitlock's mouth opened, some protest rising, but nothing came out. She looked around the chamber, at the reporters, at the cameras, at the faces of council members who had once smiled beside her at ribbon cuttings and budget meetings. There was no smoothing this over. No practiced phrase would fix it. She started, then stopped. She reached for the folder in front of her, closed it slowly, and stood. "I resign. Effective immediately." The chamber erupted into murmurs. Violet watched Whitlock gather her things with shaking hands, the woman's careful mask finally, completely gone. As Whitlock stepped away from the table, the chairman added, "This matter will also be referred to the State Attorney General's office for investigation into potential corruption charges related to the Larkspur Holdings acquisitions." Whitlock said nothing more. She walked out of the chamber alone, past reporters shouting questions she didn't answer, past neighbors from Larkspur Court who watched her go without a shred of sympathy. The chairman turned next toward Vandorf. "Chief Vandorf, this council has also reviewed evidence suggesting your department suppressed the original body cam footage and expedited a report favorable to Officer Keener, despite clear indications of misconduct." Vandorf straightened in his chair, attempting one last thread of authority. "I was following standard procedure regarding—" "Chief," the chairman interrupted, "you are hereby removed from command, effective immediately, pending a full investigation into your conduct." Vandorf's face went pale, then blank, the same practiced calm he'd used on Violet's lawn weeks ago failing him entirely now. He didn't argue further. He simply nodded once, stiffly, and sat back in his seat as council staff approached to escort him from the chamber. Violet watched it all unfold with a strange, quiet stillness settling over her, different from the fury she'd carried for weeks. This wasn't triumph, exactly. It was something steadier, something that felt, finally, like the ground shifting back under her feet. By that evening, a final piece of news broke across every local channel. The police department, under new interim leadership, announced that Officer David Keener had been formally terminated, his prior reinstatement reversed and voided. The announcement noted he would be referred for criminal charges connected to the documented pattern of harassment against elderly homeowners on Larkspur Court. Violet watched the announcement from her living room, Ivan seated beside her, both of them silent as the anchor read Keener's name alongside the words criminal referral. "It's over," Ivan said quietly, though his voice carried disbelief more than certainty. "Not quite," Violet said, "but close." Her phone buzzed. A message from Danica. Council just voted unanimously to drop the impeachment proceedings against Ivan. They're commending his conduct instead. Check the news. Violet turned to Ivan, who was already reading the same message on his own phone, his shoulders finally loosening after weeks of holding tension she hadn't fully realized he'd been carrying. "They dropped it," he said, voice cracking slightly. "All of it." Violet reached over and took his hand, gripping it the way she had on so many nights over 30 years, back when he was a frightened little boy who needed someone steady beside him. "I told you," she said softly. "We finish what they started." Outside, the evening settled quiet and ordinary over Larkspur Court, streetlights flickering on one by one, the whole block finally, blessedly still. The morning sun hit the roses just right when Violet Malcolm knelt down in her front garden again. No cruiser sat at the curb this time. No officer stood over her with his hand on his belt. Just the quiet hum of the street waking up around her, birds calling from the oak tree 2 houses down, a lawnmower starting somewhere in the distance. She pressed her fingers into the same soil she'd knelt in weeks ago, the same dirt that had pressed against her cheek the morning this all began. It felt different now, somehow. Softer. Or maybe she was just different, kneeling in it. The news had settled overnight into something solid and real. Larkspur Holdings had collapsed entirely, its assets frozen pending the corruption investigation into Whitlock's dealings. The city council, moving fast in the scandal's wake, had voted to grant historic designation to the entire block, a permanent shield against any future company trying to pry these homes away from the families who'd built lives inside them. The code violation notice against Violet's house had been formally voided, struck from the record like it had never existed at all. Keener faced his charges now in a courtroom instead of a patrol car. Whitlock faced hers alongside him, her name dragged through headlines that once used to praise her. Vandorf, stripped of his command, waited on the sidelines of an investigation that would likely end his career for good. None of it brought back Regina Coleman's porch, or the sweet tea evenings Violet used to share there. None of it undid the months Mr. Dorothy spent being pushed out of the only home he'd known for 30 years. But something had shifted, finally, in the direction of justice, instead of away from it, and Violet allowed herself to feel that. A car door closed somewhere behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "You're early," she called out, not looking up from the rosebush. Ivan crossed the lawn the way he always had. No motorcade rushing behind him this time, no urgency pulling him faster than a normal walk. Just her son, coming for their Thursday lunch, the tradition they'd kept since he was 8 years old, and grieving and unsure if anyone would ever choose him again. "Couldn't stay away," he said, lowering himself down onto the grass beside her, careful of his suit pants. "Figured I'd help." Violet handed him a small trowel without a word, and he took it, turning the soil beside her the way she'd taught him decades ago, back when he was small enough that gardening felt like magic instead of chore. Down the street, a neighbor waved from her porch, the same woman who'd shouted at Keener weeks ago, who'd stood filming with her phone raised while Violet lay pinned to the grass. Violet waved back, feeling something warm pass between them that hadn't been there before all this happened. The whole block felt different now, closer somehow, bound together by what they'd all witnessed, what they'd all refused to look away from. "You okay?" Ivan asked quietly, glancing sideways at her as he pressed a seed into the dirt. Violet considered the question honestly before answering. "The ground's the same," she said finally. "Same dirt, same grass. What changed is who had to answer for what happened on it." Ivan nodded slowly, understanding settling into his expression. "That matters." "It does," Violet agreed. "It matters more than I expected it to." They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Mother and son, side by side in the garden that had nearly been stolen out from under her. Violet pressed new seeds into the soil where the shears had once fallen from her hand, where she'd once lain pinned and cuffed and certain, even then, that this fight was far from finished. She'd been right about that. She'd also been right that she'd survive it. "Same time next week?" Ivan asked, brushing dirt from his palms as he finally stood. "Same time every week," Violet said, allowing herself a small, tired smile. "That's not up for negotiation." Ivan reached down and helped her to her feet, the way he had on this exact lawn weeks ago, except this time there were no cameras, no cuffs, no crowd gathering in alarm. Just an ordinary afternoon settling over Larkspur Court. Sunlight warm across the roses, the whole street breathing easy for the first time in a long while. Violet looked out over her lawn, her home, her block, finally, truly safe, and felt something settle deep and permanent in her chest. She had promised Keener he'd regret what he did to her. She'd kept that promise, every word of it. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.